Hello, and welcome to episode 136 on the Everyday Joy podcast. Got a great message through from Cassie following the bonus episode that was released not too long ago. She said, loved this bonus and had no idea the Everyday Joy hour was on the light as I am working when it's on. Yep, because it's between 12 to 1 on Friday afternoons. Cassie also continued to say, beautiful, thoughtful callers. Yep, so the Everyday Joy hour is an opportunity where we get to open up the phone lines and invite callers into the conversation. And we had a great chat about honouring your parents and what that looks like, because honouring your parents, loving your parents, two very different things. It can be a really complicated space to be in. And if you are torn and if you're struggling in that space, go check out that bonus episode. But yes, tune in. Fridays between 12 and 1 to 89.9 The Light. I'm the afternoons show announcer between 12 and 3. And I'd love to hear your voice. Would love to have you as part of the conversation as well. If you do have any more reviews, if you haven't left a 5-star review yet, that really makes a difference. And you can do that right now if you're loving this podcast. Let's get into today's Bible verse.
Jesus said, when you stand and pray, forgive anything you may have against anyone, so that your Father in heaven will forgive the wrongs you have done. Mark chapter 11, verse 25 from the Good News Translation.
I have got George here with me from the Bible Boost podcast. George, so good to have you on the show again.
Well, thanks, Joy. Always a delight and an honour to be on your podcast.
What I love, George, is that unknowingly, this triplet of episodes, yesterday's episode, today's episode, and tomorrow's one, all center around this theme of forgiveness and others and vulnerability. And today's one is a challenging verse. That's my first impression of this one. When you stand and pray, forgive anything you may have against anyone, so that your Father in heaven will forgive the wrongs you have done. And that is really hard to do, because sometimes it is really challenging to pause long enough to say to yourself, okay, who do I need to forgive first before I go to God in prayer about all my other needs? It's a discipline. It's something I have to do sometimes. Sometimes I'll be praying. I'll just be like, God this, God this, God that. And I'm like, wait a second, Lord, let's rewind it. I need to work through this hurt.
Yeah.
What about you, George?
Yeah, for me, the first impression is that it's not really a bumper sticker verse. You know, it's not one of those verses that's really popular and that people have on bumper stickers or coffee mugs, you know, these Bible verses that everyone knows by heart. I mean, we've talked about some of those verses in previous episodes of your podcast, and don't get me wrong, they're great, but I don't think this one's really in that category. And maybe it's because, as you're alluding to there, Joy, maybe it's because it's a bit harder for us to hear.
Yeah. I mean, it does, though, reveal a lot about, and this is interesting because I'm only picking this up as we're talking about it now. The Bible talks a lot about prayer, but this is a particular verse that kind of tells you like how to pray. And what I love is that it says, when you stand and pray, forgive anything you may have against anyone. It really talks about entering into God's presence in a way that you're not just asking him for things back to back to back to back. It gives you a sense of, right, you need to clean yourself up first. You need to figure out what's going on in yourself. You need to really think deeply about what you're bringing into this sacred space of prayer. And I think that's what I'm just realizing now, that prayer is sacred. And that this tells me that when we enter into that space, God's saying, hey, it matters. The condition of your heart, your intention, where you're at, it matters. And it reminds me of an episode actually I heard on one of your other podcasts, George, the Bible Boost, where you talked about Moses and taking off the sandals, and this fact that it was a sacred, holy space that you are entering. And maybe these days we get a bit flippant with prayer. We get a bit too conversational and colloquial. And today maybe the focus is going back to the fact that, for me anyway, I'm talking to the Lord of all creation. I need to have a sense of responsibility around the position of my heart and the way I enter that sacred space. So that for me, I think, is what this verse tells me about who God is and what matters to him. What about you, George?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you make, Joy. And it reminds me, as you say that, about the link between forgiveness and prayer. It reminds me of that line in the Lord's Prayer, which is, the ultimate example of how to pray, if you like. Jesus himself teaches us how to pray. And there's that line which says, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. So if we think about that in the wider context of the Jesus story, really we can say this is a big part of the whole gospel thing, isn't it? Because it's about forgiveness. It's about forgiveness that we receive from God, but it's also about us extending forgiveness to others, and you can't really separate one from the other.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we try really hard to do that. But it always comes back to learning to forgive that person, learning to forgive yourself sometimes. Forgiveness and entering into God's presence, they go hand in hand. How has this verse, George, come alive in your life?
Well, I'm laughing because I'm thinking about fast food, actually. Specifically, I am thinking about Hungry Jack's, which here in New Zealand we call Burger King.
Yeah.
It's the same company with the same staff, but over there in Oz, you call it Hungry Jack's, right?
Yeah, we do. It confused me for the longest time. It took me about a year to click that. I'm like, oh, this is Burger King.
If you think it confused you, you got nothing on me, because I remember going to Australia as a teenager and staying with some really good friends up in Brisbane, actually, and I referred to it as Happy Jacks. I thought that's what it was called there. And man, did they think that was funny. They still think it's funny. Happy Jacks, they're like, wow, what are you talking about? They just lost it. And I guess it does sound quite funny to an Aussie, but I'm like, I don't know, whatever. Happy Jacks, Hungry Jacks, we just call it Burger King over here in New Zealand. Anyway, the reason I say that is not because it makes me look cool, because it certainly doesn't. But the reason I say it is because the slogan of that company for years was have it your way. And it occurs to me that with this whole forgiving others thing, actually we don't get to do that. It's not a have it your way type of thing, right? So if we go back to this verse we're looking at in the episode, Jesus says, forgive anything you may have against anyone. He doesn't say, if you feel like it, have it your way. No, he says, this is what we have got to do. And I know from my own personal experience that if we can do this, then it's actually really good for us. It feels really freeing. Now, a few months back, you and I talked in one of your podcast episodes, Joy, about a situation in my life where someone had hurt me and they came to me very humbly asking for forgiveness. It was, just an amazing moment, really. I won't sort of rehash the whole story now, but if you are listening to this episode and you want to hear that story a bit fuller, look up episode 38. So it's episode 38. You can find it there. I won't say it all again now, but I'll just say that when that person did that, when they said sorry, and when I said it was okay, that I forgave them, it felt really good. It felt really freeing. So I guess to me it shows that when Jesus asks us or tells us to do something, he's always got our best interest at heart. So no, it's not like Hungry Jacks or even Happy Jacks. We can't have it our way with forgiveness. But maybe that's a good thing, because he knows what's best for us.
Mark chapter 11, verse 25. Jesus said, when you stand and pray, forgive anything you may have against anyone, so that your Father in heaven will forgive the wrongs you have done. I love what George shared earlier about the Burger King have it your way. But when it comes to prayer, this verse talks about a certain cleansing process, a certain way of entering into that sacred space that enables us to hear clearly from God, but also to respect the space that we are in. And I think that's the one thing that I take away from today's episode. It's doing a self-check. Asking myself these 3 questions, and you can ask yourself these 3 questions as well. Maybe for you, you haven't quite been able to have that same sense of intimacy when you pray. Maybe for you, you feel like there is a blockage. Maybe for you, you just want to switch up your prayer life a little bit, try something a little different. So ask yourself these 3 questions before you start asking God what you need him to do in your life. The first question is, Lord, reveal to me who I need to forgive. You may find that a person or a situation or something pops up in your mind, so take that to God. Unpack it with Him. Ask Him to reveal to you, first of all, what is in your heart. The second thing is ask God to give you the strength to forgive. Inviting God into your area of vulnerability, saying to God, it's really hard to forgive this person, but God, would you help me? Would you help me to deal with this situation? And that enables you to access God's supernatural strength, supernatural ability to forgive. And the next thing is to ask yourself, Lord, is there anything in me that I need forgiveness for? And I feel like this last bit really helps me, because it makes me realize that I too am a sinner. I too rely on the grace of God. I too need forgiveness, and that I shouldn't be on such a high horse. So those are 3 questions you can ask yourself. Number 1, Lord, reveal to me who I need to forgive. Number 2, Lord, can you help me to forgive this person? And the last one, Lord, are you able to reveal to me anything that I have done that I need to be forgiven of? Well, that wraps up today's episode on the Everyday Joy podcast. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a real theme around forgiveness and relationships this week. And I really think that if you are struggling with forgiving someone, if you are dealing with a particular hurt, you're going to get a lot out of tomorrow's episode. We are going to dive deeper into that area. So I look forward to catching up then tomorrow, right here on the Everyday Joy podcast.